On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man walked to the ticket counter. It was at Portland International Airport in Oregon. He was of average height and build. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He carried a black attaché case. The day was the day before Thanksgiving. The airport was busy with holiday travelers. The man appeared calm and unremarkable. He blended in with the other businessmen passing through the terminal that day. No one paid him much attention. He purchased a one-way ticket. The ticket was for Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. The destination was Seattle, Washington. He paid for his ticket with cash. The ticket agent wrote this name down. He was assigned a seat in the rear of the aircraft. He walked to the gate and waited with the other passengers. His demeanor was quiet. He did not draw any eyes to himself. The aircraft was a Boeing 727. It was a common and reliable plane for domestic routes in the 1970s. As boarding began, the man joined the line. He found his seat, number 18C, in the aft section of the passenger cabin. He placed his black briefcase under the seat in front of him. He fastened his seatbelt. The flight attendants performed their pre-flight safety checks. The engines spooled up. The plane taxied to the runway. At 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Flight 305 took off as scheduled. The mood on the plane was normal. Passengers settled in for the short journey. Some read newspapers. Others looked out the windows at the gray sky over the Pacific Northwest. Shortly after the plane reached its cruising altitude, the man in seat 18C made his move. He signaled to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She was walking down the aisle. He held out a small, folded piece of paper. She initially thought he was giving her his phone number. She was a young woman. This was a common occurrence for flight attendants at the time. She smiled politely and put the note in her pocket without reading it.
Miss, you better look at that note.
The flight attendant walked to the galley. She unfolded the paper. Her hands began to tremble as she read the words. The note was written in neat, all-capital letters with a felt-tip pen. It stated that he had a bomb in his briefcase. He wanted her to sit next to him. She did as she was instructed. He opened his briefcase just enough for her to see inside. She saw a mass of wires. She saw red-colored sticks. She saw a large battery. It looked like a real functioning bomb. He then closed the briefcase. He stated his demands clearly and without emotion. He wanted $200,000. The money had to be in unmarked $20 bills. He also wanted 4 parachutes. The flight attendant relayed the hijacker's demands to the cockpit. She informed the captain, William Scott. The captain immediately contacted air traffic control. He informed them of the hijacking. He passed on the demands. The airline's president, Donald Nirop, was notified. He made a decision. He decided to cooperate fully with the hijacker. The safety of the 36 passengers, 6 crew members. The crew was instructed to tell the passengers there was a minor mechanical issue. This was to avoid panic. The plane began to circle Puget Sound. It waited while authorities on the ground scrambled. The FBI was notified. The case was given the code name Norjack, Northwest Hijacking, agents in Seattle, agents in Portland. They began gathering the items the hijacker requested, finding $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills. The FBI photographed every single bill. On the aircraft, Dan Cooper remained composed. He ordered a second bourbon and soda. He paid for it. He offered to pay for the flight attendant's meal. Crew described him as polite, not threatening, matter of fact. He gave specific instructions for the exchange. Money and parachutes to be delivered after landing at Seattle-Tacoma. Flight 305 landed at 5:39 p.m. The plane was directed to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac. Window shades were lowered. He was in control. Passengers, unaware, told the plane needed to refuel. An airline employee drove a vehicle to the aircraft. The exchange was made. Items passed through a cabin door. 36 passengers, 2 flight attendants. They walked down the stairs into the rainy Seattle night, finally safe. With the passengers gone, only Dan Cooper and 4 crew members remained. The captain, the first officer, a flight engineer, 1 flight attendant. The hijacker now outlined the second part of his plan. He instructed the pilots to take off again. Their new destination was to be Mexico City. But he gave very specific and unusual flight parameters. The plane was not to fly higher than 10,000 feet. The landing gear was to remain down. The wing flaps were to be set at 15 degrees. These instructions slowed the aircraft to about 200 miles per hour, just above stall speed. These conditions were dangerous and put a great deal of strain on the aircraft. The pilots explained flying to Mexico City under these conditions was impossible. The plane did not have enough fuel. It would need to refuel. After discussion, a new flight plan was agreed. Fly south toward Reno, Nevada, refuel there, then continue on to Mexico. Before takeoff, Cooper made one final critical demand. He wanted the rear air stair lowered. The air stair, located in the tail, was a unique 727 feature. It was designed for ground use, not for opening during flight. The flight crew protested. They warned him it would be unsafe. Cooper insisted it was not a problem. The crew complied. The plane was refueled. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Seattle again. The cabin remained unpressurized, necessary to open the rear door. The flight attendant was told to go into the cockpit and close the curtain, and remain there with the crew. Cooper was now alone in the dark, cold passenger cabin. The cockpit crew could only monitor instruments. The plane flew south into a dark, stormy night. The weather was poor, there were heavy clouds and rain. Visibility was extremely low. The temperature outside was well below freezing. The flight path took the Boeing 727 south from Seattle. It passed over the city of Portland. It flew over the rugged forested terrain of southwestern Washington. In the cockpit, the crew watched their instruments. They were tense. They did not know what the man in the back was doing. He had told them not to come out. Around 8 p.m., they saw a warning light flash on the instrument panel. The light indicated that the aft air stair was being opened. The air pressure in the cabin changed. The tail of the aircraft experienced a sudden upward movement. This event occurred at approximately 8:13 p.m. The plane was flying through a heavy rainstorm. It was somewhere between Seattle and Reno. The precise location was thought to be over the Lewis River in southwestern Washington. The crew did not see anything. They did not hear a shout. They only knew from their instruments that something had happened at the rear of the plane. The man known as Dan Cooper had lowered the stairs. He had stepped out into the freezing 200-mile-per-hour wind. He had jumped into the vast, dark wilderness below. He carried the bag of money with him. He was equipped with one of the parachutes. Which one he used is not known for certain. He left 2 of the 4 parachutes behind on the plane. He also left his black clip-on tie. These items would become key pieces of evidence. But at that moment, all the crew knew was that he was gone. He had vanished from their aircraft. He had disappeared into the night. The pilots continued to fly the plane according to the agreed-upon flight plan. The idea of someone jumping from a commercial jetliner in mid-flight was unheard of. The conditions were extremely dangerous. He jumped at night. He jumped into a storm. He jumped over a dense, mountainous forest. The chances of survival seemed very slim. Yet, he had planned it. He had executed it. He had disappeared without a trace. The crew in the cockpit kept their composure. They flew on toward their destination. The main part of the ordeal was over. The mystery was just beginning. 2 fighter jets from the Air National Guard had been scrambled. They were following Flight 305, but they kept their distance. They did not see the jump. The night was too dark. The cloud cover was too thick. The Boeing 727 was flying too low and too slow. The airliner continued its journey south. It flew for about 2 more hours. The crew remained in the cockpit. They did not venture back into the passenger cabin. They did not know for sure if the hijacker was truly gone. At approximately 10:15 p.m., Northwest Orient Flight 305 landed safely at Reno Tahoe International Airport. The pilots taxied the plane to an isolated part of the airfield. It was immediately surrounded by FBI agents and local police. The authorities approached the aircraft with extreme caution. They did not know what they would find inside. They established communication with the captain. The crew confirmed they were safe. They believed the hijacker was no longer on board, but they could not be certain. Law enforcement officers armed with rifles and shotguns carefully boarded the plane. They moved slowly down the aisle. The passenger cabin was empty. The rear air stair was still down, flapping in the wind. The man was gone. They searched every part of the aircraft. They looked in the lavatories. They checked the overhead bins. There was no sign of Dan Cooper. He had simply vanished. The 4 remaining crew members were now safe. Their long and stressful ordeal was finally over. The plane was declared a crime scene. The FBI began a meticulous examination. They dusted for fingerprints. They collected fibers. They photographed everything. They found the 2 parachutes that Cooper had left behind. They also found his black clip-on tie on one of the seats. They found 8 cigarette butts in the ashtray. These items were carefully collected. They were the only physical clues the hijacker had left. The plane itself, the crew, and these few small items were all the FBI had to start their investigation. The FBI launched one of the most extensive and longest-running investigations in its history. The Norjack case involved hundreds of agents across the country. The first and most urgent task was to find the hijacker. They believed he had likely not survived the jump. A massive ground search was organized. It focused on the suspected jump zone in southwestern Washington. This area was rugged and densely wooded. It was difficult terrain to search. Soldiers from Fort Lewis, local police, civilian volunteers combed the area for weeks. The search was hampered by the bad weather. Snow soon covered the ground. This made finding any clues, like a parachute or the money, nearly impossible. The searchers found nothing. There was no body, there was no parachute, there was no money. For nearly 9 years, the case grew colder. There were no new leads. There was no sign of Cooper. There was no sign of the $200,000. Then, in February of 1980, there was a major development. An 8-year-old boy was on vacation with his family. His name was Brian Ingram. He was digging in the sand on the north bank of the Columbia River, at a place called Tina Bar. As he cleared a spot for a campfire, he uncovered 3 packets of money. The bills were wet and partially decomposed. They were bound with rubber bands. The boy and his family were not sure what they had found. They turned the money over to the police. When the FBI examined the bills, they got a surprise. They checked the serial numbers. The numbers were a match. It was the first and only piece of the ransom ever recovered. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. The boy had found just under $6,000. The rest of the money, over $194,000, was still missing. The location of the find was also puzzling. Tina Bar was miles away from the flight path and the suspected jump zone. Experts tried to explain how the money could have ended up there. The FBI conducted a thorough search of Tina Bar. They used metal detectors and dug up large portions of the riverbank. They found no more money. They found no other clues. The discovery of the money bundles did prove one thing. It proved that at least some of the ransom money had left the aircraft with the hijacker. It renewed public interest in the case. It gave investigators a new, albeit confusing, piece of the puzzle. Over the years, the D.B. Cooper case became a fixture of American folklore. The FBI file grew to be enormous. It contained information on over 1,000 potential suspects. The agency investigated each credible lead. Many people came forward claiming to be D.B. Cooper. Many others claimed a friend or relative was the hijacker. Almost all of these claims were proven to be false. People confessed on their deathbeds. Families brought forward evidence after a loved one passed away. Each time, the FBI would investigate, and each time, the evidence did not hold up. One prominent suspect was a man named Richard McCoy Jr. He was a Vietnam veteran and a skydiver. In 1972, just a few months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy hijacked a plane in a similar manner. He demanded $500,000 and jumped from the back of a Boeing 727 over Utah. He was caught. He was convicted. Some people believed he was also D.B. Cooper. However, the FBI officially ruled him out. His physical description did not match well. Also, he had a solid alibi for the night of the Cooper hijacking. He was at home with his family for Thanksgiving dinner. Another suspect was a man named Dwayne Waber. His wife claimed that on his deathbed in 1995, he told her, "I am Dan Cooper." After he died, she looked into his past. She found he had a criminal record. He had spent time in prison near Portland. He looked somewhat like the composite sketch. She contacted the FBI. They investigated her claims. They compared Weber's DNA to partial DNA profiles recovered from the tie Cooper left on the plane. The results were not a match. Weber was ruled out. This pattern repeated itself again and again. A promising lead would emerge. The media would report on it. The public would become excited. Then, a careful investigation by the FBI would find inconsistencies. The evidence would not be strong enough. The suspect would be cleared. The case was a magnet for theories and speculation. But solid, verifiable proof remained elusive. The FBI spent countless hours and resources chasing down these ghosts. The mystery only deepened with each passing decade. The man who jumped from Flight 305 remained a phantom. For 45 years, the Norjack case remained an active investigation. It was one of the longest unsolved cases and one of the most famous unsolved cases in the FBI's portfolio. Generations of agents had worked on it. New technologies had been applied to the old evidence. In the 2000s, the FBI conducted a new round of forensic analysis. They re-examined the tie. They looked for DNA. Partial DNA profile developed from the material. That profile has never been matched to any individual. It sits in a database, waiting for a potential match. The case consumed a significant amount of the FBI's resources. Agents in the Seattle field office still receive tips regularly. Each tip had to be evaluated. Many tips came from people who had just seen a television documentary. Others came from people with a new theory. The cost of keeping the investigation active was high. The chances of solving it after so many decades were growing slimmer. The agency had to consider its priorities. In July 2016, the FBI announced they were closing the active investigation. They said resources would be redirected to other priorities. They explained that after 45 years, every possible lead had been followed. The announcement marked the end of an era. It did not mean the case was solved. It did not mean the file was being thrown away. The FBI said it would no longer actively investigate tips, but the evidence would be preserved. The Norjack file was sent to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. It is kept there for historical purposes. The agency said specific physical evidence would prompt review. If someone discovered the parachute or the rest of the money, the case could be re-examined. But the days of agents following up on every phone call and every theory were over. The decision was a practical one. It was an admission that, after nearly half a century, the mystery of D.B. Cooper might never be solved. You know, it's, a tough conclusion. When we look back at this story, it is important to separate fact from fiction. The case has been romanticized, it has been turned into a legend, but at its core, it is a criminal investigation with a set of known facts. We know for certain that on November 24, 1971, a man using the name Dan Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Flight 305. We know he claimed to have a bomb. We know his demands were for $200,000. We know his demands were for 4 parachutes. We know these demands were met. We know for certain that he released the passengers in Seattle. He ordered the plane to take off again. It flew low and slow towards Reno. We know he ordered the rear air stair to be lowered. We know from the aircraft's instruments that he jumped from the plane at approximately 8:13 p.m. We know he jumped into a storm over a rugged remote area. In 1980, a small portion of the ransom money was found on the banks of the Columbia River. These are the verified, documented facts of the case. What we do not know is far more extensive. We do not know the man's true identity. The name Dan Cooper was an alias. We do not know if he survived the jump. Experts are divided on this question. The jump was extremely dangerous, but it was not impossible. We do not know what happened to the rest of the money. We do not know what happened to his parachute. We do not have a body. We do not have a confirmed landing site. We do not have a confession that has been verified by evidence. The case remains officially unsolved. It is a puzzle with many missing pieces. And we are left with the cold, hard facts of a man who stepped out of an airplane and into history.